Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. I'm your host, Mike Fisher, and today's guest is Mike Henneberger. Mike has a book out called Rock Bottom at the Renaissance, an emo kid's journey through falling in and out of love in and with New York City. That's a mouthful. Rock Bottom at the Renaissance is what you want to look for if you're looking for the book. Mike is an author, writer, director, producer. He's won Emmys. He's a fantastic writer. His book is really good. And I think people are really going to dig this episode. We dig deep and we cover some dark territory. So right up front, we talk about suicide and depression and abuse and like drug abuse. And so before the episode even starts, I want people to know that the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-8255. You always have help. There's always somebody there to listen to you. And the National Drug Helpline is 1-844-289-0879. If you are struggling with addiction and you need help, call that number and there will be somebody there to help you. This book is heavy, but in this conversation with Mike, we find that there is a great deal of light at the other end of it. So I really hope people stick around. This is a real subject. It's not light stuff like we do often on this show, but it's a fantastic book. And if you are a music fan, it is a kind of book that you'll really like because the music is mixed in with the story that of a time in Mike's life that he was going through a lot of transitions. And this is a great interview about a fantastic book. So if you are watching this on YouTube and you hit subscribe and the little bell, you will make sure to get all of our future episodes, which come out every single Wednesday. And, share this episode, especially this episode. If you think it will help somebody or reach somebody, give us a like. If you are listening to this on the podcast version, subscribe, share, give us a written review. And, I'm going to have links for all of this stuff and Mike's book. Mike also runs a charity called Zero Platoon that helps soldiers with mental health issues. So there's a lot of meat. There's a lot of meat on the bone in this episode, and I'll have links down below in the description of all of these things and all of these resources, places that you can go to get help for yourself or to help other people if you have the access to do that. Anyway, stick around for this one. It's a very, very, very good episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anyway Whatever podcast. I'm your host, Mike Fisher, and today's guest is author and producer Mike Henneberger. I was contacted by Mike's people about being on the show, and once I looked at what his book was about, we're going to talk about his book, and once I saw what his book was about, I was like, okay, yeah, this guy's going to be perfect for the show. Mike wrote a book called Rock Bottom at the Renaissance, an emo kid's journey through falling in and out of love in and with New York City. I got it out. I got the whole thing out, Mike. Hey, Mike, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me, dude.
Yeah.
I'm a fan, so I'm happy to be here too. I was saying earlier that I love listening to creative people talk about their process and their work because it is a struggle for a lot of us, and so it's good to just hear from other people in the creative community to kind of keeps you motivated.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you're absolutely right. Like talking to other people on my show all the time is like it's super healthy for me. Just like, cause as a fan, I'm sure that I have authors, I have directors, I have writers, I have musicians, I have, the entire spectrum. So just to be able to get a different kind of idea from all different types of people about how they do what they do is like super fucking killer for me.
Yeah, no, and I have the same thing too. I love doing podcasts that are just interviews because it's helps me have a better understanding of the book. And, just, I mean, we're all having a lot fewer conversations than we used to have. So it's great to talk to somebody and just have a good conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Being able to like meet new people and talk to friends I haven't talked to in a long time, because, as a creative person, also like my head's down on the grindstone a lot, and I don't get as much social activity with the people that I love as much as I should. So this has been great for that too. Like I'm like, I want to sit down and talk to this person for a week, so I'll just call them and I'll just text them and book them on the show so I can get an hour and a half of their time. So your book, you said it to me, and I appreciate the personal message in the at the beginning of it. That was super cool. I like anything that's signed by the maker, so I appreciate that. But right up front, we were talking before we got going that like the time frame for it. The book just came out, but the time frame for when it was happening was
so 2011. In fact, I actually just looked this up yesterday because I came across some photos that I took the weekend that I wrote the book, and I looked at the date of the photos, and it was October 8th, 2011. In the book, I'm in a hotel room for a weekend, and that's when I wrote a good chunk of the book. And so, that started in 2011, but it's a memoir about the first few years that I lived in New York. I moved here and didn't really have any friends, so I was alone, and I've been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder a couple years before that, so that didn't help anything. And so just those first few years being in New York and not really knowing anybody, and just kind of struggling with this new point in my life was really hard on me, and that's kind of the period that book covers.
That's just that whole thing where you were like trying to figure out how to be a Texas guy adapting to your new situation in New York was that was super cool. My wife's coming in to help me with something real quick.
Okay.
I left the window open. I need her to close because I'm afraid this is suburban Los Angeles. Some gardener within 4 houses is going to start a leaf blower any second. So sorry, I was distracted for a second, but the thing about the book, that one of the things, the first impression that I got was that kind of fish out of water. I love the new place that I'm at. I'm struggling to find my way there, but your love for the city of New York is so obvious that you pretty much figure out right away that you're gonna sort that out.
Yeah, and that's funny that you say that. And now, like, somebody's honking outside of my apartment. And my windows are closed, but I get the New York City nonstop noise here.
Sure.
But speaking of loving this city, like I used to tell people that I didn't think that. I used to warn people that this book isn't hopeful. So like, don't go into it like thinking that, or you're going to be disappointed. But then I've come to realize, and that's a new perspective there that I had, that no one's pointed out to me. And that's what I mean. Like I get a better understanding of this book when I talk to people about it. But yeah, like the romanticism I have for New York in that book, I guess kind of is hopeful. It is saying that, like, I'm going to sort it out because I choose to keep believing that this romantic idea of New York is real,
Yeah, there was a direct correlation to me between your love life in the book and your love life with New York City. I mean, it's more or less in the title too.
Yeah.
And so I think that correlation to me, like I could see it, and it was like you were kind of struggling with both of those things at the same time. And the other thing that there was several things that I could relate to immediately right in the beginning of the book. One of which was how you feel about yourself as a musician. Because I feel immediately you like right in the beginning you talk about that, and it's exactly how I feel about it, because I never really learned to play an instrument, but I've been in bands as a vocalist, and I mean I can't even sing, you know. I was always in crusty like hardcore bands, and so when you described yourself as a person who was in bands but you wouldn't consider yourself to be a musician, I was like, well, me and this dude are on the same page right out of the gate.
Which is funny because there's that whole cliche of how, like, you know, vocalists think the band revolves around them and all that, but like, I don't know, are we all like harboring that insecurity that we're not like actual musicians like everybody else in the band?
Right, dude, totally, because that was the thing with my last band. I found myself in a band with it was I hate to use the word like super group, but it was a group of guys who were really well known, like grind and death metal guys.
Cool.
Who wanted to start a side like punk band, and they were like, well, you should be the singer. And I was like, I should absolutely not have anything to do with this. I'm not in your guys' league at all. And so like for me, that was never the reality in my last band of me being, even though I was the singer, I was like, I'm just fucking along for the ride on this. Like, I'm just lucky to be here.
Well, that's crazy. Like, are you familiar with The Movie Life, Vinnie Caruana, and I Am the Avalanche? The Movie Life was like a punk band on Drive Thru Records and like the Drive Thru Records heyday. I interviewed him, and he's been doing punk rock for 25 years now, and he fell into it the same way. Like a bunch of guys from like Long Island hardcore bands were starting this band, and they said he should sing, and he'd never been a singer in a band, and he just faked it, you know, and then he's still playing in those same bands 20 plus years later.
Yeah, I never got super into that drive-through scene.
Yeah.
And this is also kind of an area that I wanted to talk about a little bit about your book. And it's one of the things that I can't remember ever seeing any other book do. And you tie the bands that you love and were listening to at the time into almost every single part of the story. And there's lyrics that are pertinent to the
kind of
the paragraphs that you're writing. And the chapters are named after particular bands or particular songs. And I don't think I've ever really seen that done that way. And I thought that was really cool, man. I thought that was really a cool and clever and smart angle to go with.
Thanks, man. While you were saying that, you were kind of glitching and freezing on me, but I got the beginning of it and the last part of it, so I know what you asked or what you said.
Okay.
But you might have to deal with that. I don't know how it's going to come out. I've been a music journalist for 15 years, and so, I mean, as I mentioned in the book, like music has just been my life since I was 14. Started my first band. It's been my actual like work life, you know, because I did all the booking for my band, I did the management for my band, for my bands that I played in. But before that, music was my life, in that like my dad always played records, and I was always singing to the radio, and like I didn't necessarily think I was going to be a musician, but I was always singing. Like I was in choir in junior high, and then I started my first band when I was 14. And then once I started my first band, that's when I was like, oh, that's it. Music is just going to be my life, you know?
Right.
So yeah, it's just the way that I think, you know, like music's usually tied. I mean, almost everything creative I've done in my life has been tied to music in one way or another. And so because I can't play any instruments, once I stopped playing in bands, I started writing music journalism and reviewing bands and interviewing bands, and I became a concert photographer. And now like I produce and direct, you know, music videos. You know, I was a video producer at Rolling Stone, at Billboard, did some stuff for Spin. So still just everything that I do is tied to music somehow. And so that's just how this book came to be. You know, for anybody who reads it, like, I'm not exactly in control of what's coming out of me because I was abusing pills pretty badly and, you know, drinking a lot. More so on that weekend when I wrote the book, like, that wasn't my normal routine. But yeah, I wasn't in control of what was coming out of me. And so it kind of just took that shape. But then, you know, as I kind of refined it over the years that I was too scared to put it out, it's just kind of become like, you know, the more I did music journalism, the more I wrote like that, where like I've never been paid really to write music journalism. Like, my brother and I started our own magazine, so like we had to sell ads to make money to do what we were doing, you know. And then, like, when I was working for places like Billboard and Rolling Stone, I was doing video production and interviewing bands there, but I wasn't writing. And so while that, you know, sucks, it gives you the luxury of choosing who you interview and choosing what you write about. And so I have the, like, fortunate experience of mostly writing about things that I'm passionate about, you know? And so that's why that comes out in the book, is because that's because I did it for so long that way, where I just wrote about bands that I cared about or that affected me. That's just what comes out in the book, you know?
That's actually really cool that is how it was, like, you know, it was very unique, and I enjoyed it as a music fan, as a person who's very similar in the same way. Like, you know, I think at my first band, around the same age as you, and the only reason I really wanted to be in a band was, I wanted to be a part of the scene, and also, you know, all I ever really wanted to do was make art for bands. And so if I had my own band, I always would have somebody to do art for that couldn't say no. My question, and you don't have to answer it, is what were the bands that you were in?
So,
because I know one of them, like, you were in touring bands, so, like, you know, they.
Yeah. Real quick before I answer that, how bad is the like honking and stuff? Do you want me to mute myself when I'm not?
It's totally fine, man.
Okay,
no,
cool.
It's totally fine. I heard one beep, and it's totally fine, and
okay.
I'm okay with that in general.
Okay. Yeah. So the first band I was in was a Christian ska band, which I was the singer of for 5 years. It was called Glue. We never got signed, or, you know, we weren't huge or anything. And this is from 97 to 2002. So, what we toured, we went on like 3 national tours. Our last tour was with a couple Tooth and Nail Records bands. So that was pretty big for us, because at that period of time, that was when, like, Tooth and Nail was huge, and they were, like, putting out great Christian punk and ska and metal and hardcore, and, you know, even some bands that weren't, you know, Christian bands. But that was the label everybody wanted to be on if you were in any vicinity of that world, you know? So we went out with a band called the Huntingtons and a band called Sidewalk Slam. And that was our last tour. And then after that, I joined or started. These guys asked me to sing for a band they were starting. And it was, so it was 2002 to 2004. So it was like that rise of, like, the screamo emo popularity. And so it was around, it was kind of like a Thursday or Further Seems Forever kind of melodic screamo band. And so that one didn't tour, but we played, like, all the Texas Warped Tour dates, and we were playing all over Texas, you know, a couple times a month, you know, like at least almost every weekend we were going out and doing shows, because I had, like, connections from my previous band, and, you know, I did all the booking and management for those bands, so I was able to, like, bring all that right over to this new band.
That's how it all works.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
sorry.
And that
band was called Waiting on Wednesday.
Oh, okay. Both of those band names sound vaguely familiar. which kind of brings me a little bit to the subject of the genre of music that's kind of covered in your book. And that was one of those things where I was just a little bit aged out of that stuff when it was becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And so a bunch of those, like, I was super into like death metal and like hardcore, like, Hatebreed, type hardcore.
Yeah.
So a little bit of that missed me, but my sons were in high school age at that time, and so they were into some of those bands, and so I'm familiar with them a little bit. But when I was reading your book, whenever something came up that was like a band that I had never heard or I hadn't listened to in a long time, like Bayside or something like that, I would listen to it while I was reading.
Yeah.
So I could get my head in the right headspace. And so just a little bit of stuff about that is that I had totally forgotten that I really liked the band The Wonder Years. Like, of all of those like emo bands, I think probably The Wonder Years was the standout for me. And then it also reminded me that there were some other bands. Like, I really like Thursday a lot. And every year in Vegas, they do Psycho Las Vegas Music Festival. And this last year that was supposed to happen in August that got canceled, there was a bunch of those bands like Thursday, Boy Sets Fire, a bunch of those bands, which I kind of liked. I actually really liked Thursday.
Yeah, I love Boy Sets Fire too. I saw them in Austin 15 years ago,
Yeah. Super good band. And bands like Hot Water Music was another one that was like one of those kind of emo-y bands that, but like bands like Dashboard Confessional and those bands totally missed. They totally missed me.
I think you said we're like 13 years apart or something.
Yeah,
but,
about there. Yeah.
I even kind of aged out of it too at that big rise of it. Like, there's a huge generation of kids who like emo started with My Chemical Romance. And that's like when it ended. That's like when it ended for me. I don't hate that band or anything, but yeah, the right like description of it is kind of aging out of it. Because it was like around 05 and 07, I started getting way more into like indie rock and kind of like more like dancey, like indie rock, kind of like,
sure,
like the Killers would be the like easiest way to describe it, or like the Hives and Hot Heat and stuff like that.
Hives are one of my very favorite bands of all time,
and
got to see them at Punk Rock Bowling Festival this last May.
Yeah.
And Hives and Refused are. I'm a Swedish music fan, like from death metal to garage rock to even I think they make the best pop music too. One of the bands that you talked about a bit in the book was Two Door Cinema Club.
Yeah, like that's another one.
Who was a band that I had never heard of at all, and is not traditionally the type of music that I would be associated with from outside people.
Yeah.
But I listened to it. That band's fantastic.
Yeah, that record, man. Like, now you could probably understand why like that chapter that I write about them. Like, I love seeing them because they're that good, man.
Yeah, they're really good, and so thank you for turning me on to them, because they're going to go into my rotation now. And I'm probably going to put some Wonder Years back in there too, because that band, they're the real thing for sure, man.
Yeah, no, I love hearing that too, because like, I am currently like licensing the music, or working on licensing the music for the audiobook. And through like my music journalism days, I've, met a lot of these guys. I was writing about them when, a lot of them when like not a lot of people were writing about them. And I know some of them personally, but not many of them. And so like, I love hearing that, because they've all been so great about supporting this and like, having my back when it comes to requesting the songs and stuff. And so like, I'm glad that like, I knew that it was going to be introducing some bands to some people, and I'm glad to hear that, because it's like, that's that's a small part of what I want to do with this too. You know, there's so many more important things as far as like the mental health aspect of it, but a big part of it too that's always been a big part of my life is exposing new music to people, you know.
Absolutely.
And I don't know if you noticed this or not, but did you see this in the front of the book? The
I did
QR
see that
codes? Okay, because a lot of people, I printed some where it was smaller and people missed it, and people still miss it sometimes. But yeah, it's got the QR code there so people can scan it for Spotify or Apple Music and download the whole playlist. And that has like every song mentioned in the book, not just the chapter songs. Like there's some Dion and the Belmonts in there. There's some Five Iron Frenzy.
The Wanderers. That whole Wanderers, that thing where you describe kind of like really quickly the amazingness of Dion's trajectory in his lyrical stuff, like from the hopeless romantic to the man slut, like within 2 records, which is, I thought that made me laugh when I read that. That was fantastic. You know, and I'll put links to those playlists in the. I'm gonna put links to a bunch of stuff for this episode in my description stuff, because you touched on the mental health stuff a little bit, and you touched on the addiction stuff a little bit so far, and I'm gonna go into that a little bit more. But in the beginning of the book, you put like the National Suicide Prevention number and the substance abuse information, and I'm going to add that in. And when I do my introduction, when I'm editing this, I'm going to make sure to let people know right up front about those 2 things, because I think anytime, you know, especially in this day and age, when you start touching on subjects like that, I think you need to let people know right up front what they're getting into.
No, for sure. Yeah.
And that's why I thought it was such a cool thing for you to put in the beginning of the book, because I mean, that's really the book itself. Anybody who listens to this show knows that I'm not super big on like pigeonholing. I don't like to tell people like what like this book's about this or this book's about that, or you know, one of the other things that I wanted to bring up before we go into bigger topics on the book is when you have to be careful when you tell somebody that their work reminds them of somebody else.
Oh yeah, I'm not offended by that at all, and there's been so many like comparisons to High Fidelity, which like it's self-aware of. Like I reference High Fidelity like 3 times in there, so it's I mean this is the first book I've ever written, so I don't get offended by anything.
The style immediately, not that I would draw a direct comparison, but the style to me, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with the author, Dan Fonte.
I read Ask the Dusk. That's him, right?
I'm pretty sure. The ones I'm familiar with, the ones in my collection are Chump Change and 86th. But yeah, like it has a very similar, because all of his books were kind of about, I'm going to take a lot of drugs. I'm going to feel bad about myself. I'm going to do sketchy sexual things with sketchy sexual people. And so not that that's what your book is necessarily about, but there was just like the general feel of like, it's like, it's almost like there's like a pressure around the subject that I felt with your story, the same thing I feel with Dan's stories, and you know he's passed away and stuff, but yeah, that whole family. The dad was a writer, I think, for the LA Times, and you know the son, you know, they're like a whole family of writers, so he may be related. I'll have to check. Hopefully that ends up being, if you check out his books, you're like, oh wow, that's cool. This guy's stuff is really good. But it has that same kind of like, I hate to say Bukowski, but it's that same kind of grit to it. They know that.
Yeah, and that's
city life.
I've gotten comparisons to Bukowski and Chuck Palahniuk,
sure,
Chuck Klosterman, because you know the music side of it. which I love all of those comparisons. And I actually just looked it up real quick, and Dan Fonte is the son of John Fonte.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
But yeah, check out Ask the Dust by John Fonte, because I think it's in the same vein as that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I appreciate any of that stuff, because I actually am not a huge reader, and as much as I want to be and try to be, I just like I get so wrapped up in working on stuff that it's so hard for me to let myself do anything that I don't feel an immediate like productivity out of, which I completely understand the long-term value of reading, but I just like my ADD, I just have to be like working on something. So I
totally understand that one.
Yeah, so like I mean, if somebody told me my book sounded like some other author, I wouldn't fight it, because I don't know. I don't read enough, so I'll take your word for it. But yeah, I mean, I've read enough, Vonnegut and Bukowski and Klosterman, not Palahniuk, but and I love Nick Hornby. Like, I've read a couple Nick Hornby books. But yeah.
Yeah, so. I love Chuck. I love Chuck Palahniuk. In particular, that book Choke. Obviously, Fight Club is like, for American men, it's like, kind of a flagship story. I didn't love the book as much as I loved the movie, but opposite for Choke. I loved Choke, the book, so much.
I've been listening to the audiobook of Choke, because the singer from The Dangerous Summer told me my book was like Choke meets High Fidelity meets Catcher in the Rye. And so I wanted to read Choke, and so I've been listening to that audiobook.
I can totally get that. That is a good comparison. But yeah, the movie Choke could have been better.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Yeah, and so okay, we covered. I'm just trying to, like, as I was reading, I like for the listeners, like the book came in the mail, and I kind of had a short time to read it. And I sat and like just kind of digested it down in like 3 big gulps. And so there's some things in particular that I wanted to address. And it was like the not feeling like a musician, even though you've been in bands that have done all kinds of things. Yeah. I think that was like a big one. And then the other one that was kind of upfront, and it's prevalent through the entire book. And this kind of goes to the suicidal ideation stuff. I think that there are people, and it's how I've always it's the space that my head has been in kind of since I was a teenager, and you start going through those times of, like, I think most people go through in their teenagers of like, what the fuck is the point of all of this type of shit? And I think people either overtly suicidal, like I want to die.
Yeah.
And then there are people who are like, I'm just not that attached to living. And I feel like that was kind of where your head was at in the book. And I could relate to that because in my life, that has, there have been a lot of times in my life where I'm like, I'm not going to kill myself. Like, I don't, that's not where I'm at, but yeah. I'm not attached to living. And so if I don't, that's okay too. So that, I think that for me, there were the couple things that pulled me into the book really quick were those things. Like, I don't think I'm really a musician, and I'm not super attached to life all of the time.
Yeah. And like, it's, like I want to say it's like chapter 3 is practically like a suicide note. So it gets there pretty quick. Yeah, and this is another thing that I'm only recently, very recently, in the last couple months, the more I talk about this stuff, have accepted, and it's only because like I'm in a much better mental health space than I've ever been in my life. Sure. And that's why this book is out. It sat on the shelf for years because I wasn't doing any better, and I didn't want people to know what was going on in my head. Sure. Even though years had passed, some of that was still happening, and I didn't want people to know. So it took me, finding the right therapist, finding the right medication, working, like meditating, trying to just being much healthier about how I treat my stuff. And so it took me doing that to get comfortable enough to put this out. And so this new realization that I've come to has like been easier for me to accept and admit. But like, I was suicidal, like there's at least 3 times in the book where I almost kill myself, accidentally, because I abused right. because I abused enough pills to kill somebody, mixed with cocaine, mixed with scotch, mixed with Ambien. Like, I did enough to kill myself a couple of times. And I say in the book that, like, I wasn't trying to kill myself. And so back then, and even up until recently, I never would have said that I was suicidal. I did have that detachment from life that I didn't care if I died. But I think, and this is just, my new feeling about this, I think that if you're if you're careless enough to do things that will kill you, I think you are suicidal. I think you're being suicidal if you're, mixing drugs like that, knowing that it could kill you, which almost all of us do. We all should know that. Then you're suicidal. Like, if you're doing things that can kill you, you're suicidal, So it's one thing to, like, be okay if you died and not be doing things that could kill you. But I think in those cases where, like, I was very in denial up until recently that I was suicidal, because I was never, like, deciding to kill myself,
Totally.
Or trying to. But I think I was, otherwise I wouldn't have let myself be that reckless.
Total, dude. Yes. You know what? The fact that you've come to that realization, even just recently, I think that's amazing. And I think in the book, there are definitely some times where you're reading and you're like, yeah, I don't think this guy's quite put all the pieces together about where he's at with this. But yeah, I mean, I guess, for me, just, not that it matters, just as a reader and somebody speaking to you about it, is that I was never a drug guy at all, like even prescription drugs guy. I kind of grew up in the straight edge scene. And so, I don't even take aspirin unless I'm going to die.
Yeah.
And so the mixing of pills and alcohol thing, that one, that definitely gave me a sense of, well, this guy's definitely playing around with fire with this stuff for sure. And I've never done coke. Like I smoked pot like a handful of times.
Yeah.
I'm a beer only guy. I don't really drink hard alcohol. It makes me want to fight people, and I'm not big enough to get away with that. I used to try, but yeah, just like you could feel your discomfort through that whole section. And then, when you add in the lovesick part of it, and I think that those things kind of, I got the impression, along with with any addictions you had to substances, you were a little bit of a love addict as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, and it was, it's just like the root of it all is like the depression and the anxiety, because that just tricks you. It's just like a drug addiction, and that it tricks you into thinking you need something that you don't really need, and sure. It tricks you into thinking you need something that really isn't going to give you what you're looking for,
Yeah.
It's the same thing as, whatever, like, chemical addictions, drug addictions are chemical addictions, and that's what depression is. It's, it's a lack of a chemical. And so it just tricks you into thinking these things. And I've also come to realize that my story isn't, there's nothing in the book that's so traumatizing that excuses any of this, or, would make anybody understand, like, oh, I get why you went through that, because it's no different than anybody else being heartbroken, or, some of these girls weren't even actually none of them in the book were even girlfriends, you know? Like it was just like me being lonely in a new city and depressed and thinking that that's what I needed and putting
a
so
girl
much
was going to
value in
fix
it.
that problem
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah, it wasn't even like I lost a girlfriend of like 4 years, you know? And so like but I love that about it because it shows how fucked up depression is because you don't need something super triggering or super traumatic to set it off. You don't need anything to set it off, actually.
Right.
And you can fall that far down. And so, like, you know, people who deal with it will understand that. But also, like, I want people, like, the whole reason I finally came around to putting this book out was because one day I reread it like I did, you know, multiple times a year. Well, I kept it to myself. And I was reading it differently. It no longer felt like it was about me. And it felt like I was reading a novel that was helping me as somebody with depression. And so I saw it as something that will also help people who don't deal with any mental health issues but have a loved one who does or a friend who does. And they can understand, like, holy shit, like, these little things affected that guy that bad. Like, that's how fucked up that disease is, you know? And so maybe it'll help some people better understand some of their friends who deal with this stuff, you know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think a lot of, you know, I don't know. I've spent so much of my life in like the underground scene and the punk scene and the metal scene and stuff. And so, you know, all of my peers and associates and friends and all of those people kind of are of the same world. And I don't have a lot of, outside of family, I don't really have a lot of contact with what you would call normal people. And so
Yeah.
pretty much everybody I know struggles with depression on some level or anxiety on some level. And I think that's what brings people to the outsider cultures is that we're not people who necessarily fit in with regular folks. And so I think that the reason we listen to the music that we do and the reason that we found ourselves in those places is that, you know, we share that common thing. And so it didn't even occur to me until you were just talking about it that somebody who isn't one of our tribe could read it and see something about someone in their life and be like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah.
You know, like it didn't, like I didn't realize that this little thing that they got upset about that I thought was nothing, like sent them down this wormhole. And like, so that's a really great insight, I think, into the book, because, you know, as a reader, I was reading it as one thing, and then here talking to you about it and hearing some of the things that you found out about the book, even now after years of having read it with a different mindset. I think that's fantastic. And you know, it should be said that, you know, with what we're talking about, that if you are listening and you have feelings of suicide or of harming yourself, there's help out there. You're not alone. Every single person in this country can get help. I will make sure to post the National Suicide Hotline in the comments below. And another thing also that people who suffer from depression don't always, and I do myself as well. It's the older I've gotten and the more freedom I've gotten to do what I want to do with my life, the less it is any kind of problem for me.
Yeah.
But you know, when I was in my 30s and in early 40s, it was a heavy thing. But my diagnosis is obsessive compulsive disorder. That is the struggle that I've had my entire life. But where was I going with that? I can't remember where I was going with
Well,
that.
I also, and I mean, I wanted to say you kind of came to terms with that in your 30s, you said, and I started writing this book when I was 28, and I want, you know, like that's, like you were just talking about how, you know, people are not alone and anybody can find help with this, and that's why I put this book out. You know, there's plenty in there that makes me look bad and that could embarrass me or whatever, but for all the people that will hopefully feel less alone in their struggle, to see that somebody else is going through it too, um, and I could only write down this stuff because of the songs I mentioned in it. Those musicians wrote it down. They put their struggles into their music, and I felt less alone, and that's why those songs are in the book. And so I'm just hoping that this continues that cycle to show people who read it that they're not alone, and that it's okay to talk about it. It's not that bad, that people know some of the shitty things that I did that are in this book. But yeah, like that's also something actually I haven't even I haven't talked about with anybody except Anthony from Bayside. I met with him in Nashville like a month ago, because I went to Nashville to get a bunch of posters and books signed that I'm going to be auctioning for charity next month. And I met up with Anthony, and I told him that I want to turn this into a TV show, because like it is about somebody in their late 20s to early 30s. Almost every show that really tackles this, there have been some good ones, and it's becoming more mainstream more recently, but all these kinds of issues are normally covered in like a high school teen drama,
Sure.
And I don't know if that says something bad about me or a generation or whatever of delayed emotional intelligence, but it's a real thing. And so what? It's not our fault. It wasn't because of decisions we made. It's because of environments that we grew up in. And so it's something that a lot of us are dealing with a lot later in life than previous generations. And so yeah, I want people to know that that this book isn't about a lonely lost 22-year-old straight out of college. It's about a fucking 28-year-old who got out of the army with like a fucked up head, and who had lived all over the country, toured all over the country, had a pretty experienced life, but still managed to fall down this hole. There's no particular age where this is supposed to happen. Like, it's okay if you're dealing with it in your 30s or 40s or whenever.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. And I think it's one of those things where every generation of Americans kind of has had its own set of struggles that created a particular set of issues. Like you had, like, my parents were raised by people who went through World War II.
Yeah.
And dads who and husbands who came home from the war shattered, and raised families. And so, like my parents' generation, they had this particular upbringing that they had to deal with.
Yeah.
And then you have my generation who were raised in the 70s and 80s where, we were latchkey kids whose both parents worked, and we had this suburban angst and loneliness, and that's how we ended up with punk rock and heavy metal. And then you had like your generation, which I kind of consider my kids to be in your generation, even though you're a little bit older. But you guys had a whole different set of things, like divorced parents and and so it's interesting that the depression it's almost always a chemical situation. I think everybody can agree. And it's always been that way, but it kind of is brought on by a different type of upbringing that we go through as Americans. And then, and I think that, like, you guys got it a little bit later. Like, I think that my age group, we kind of got it bad in the 80s because we were just by ourselves a lot. And you guys got more freedom than we did. And I think maybe you were busy partying through it a little bit younger than we were. So by the time you got to your 30s, like late 20s and early 30s, and you started to become grown-ups, you were like, oh, holy shit.
Yeah, I think probably and I mean, I don't know. I don't have a lot of, I didn't grow up with a lot of kids who had a similar upbringing to me. Like, I grew up super poor, but managed to, like, have friends who seemed, who had married parents and who had nice houses and, there, like I would sleep at my friends' houses like for a week on this, like during the summer, because it was just more comfortable to be there. um, but yeah, so I'll never assume that like my upbringing is indicative of like a generation or anything, but like, yeah, I mean, I think it is fair to say that we were given, like my generation is kind of given the okay to not have to worry about being an adult right away, or as early as previous generations. And so then you like get to your late 20s and you're like, oh fuck, now I'm supposed to be an adult by now, but I'm not. And then you're dealing with this like huge crisis because you're not what you think you should be, which like still followed me into my mid 30s. So
sure, dude, I totally get that. Like I watched that a little bit with my own kids, where they're like becoming adults now. They're all over 25, and watching each of them is so unique and so different from each other. Watching each of them become adults it's been a cool thing.
And for me, like in particular, like my cops keep driving by. And I don't live in a bad neighborhood. I just live on the road that is the road everybody uses to get from like the main highway and like the bridge to like the other streets. So it's
you said you were in Astoria, right?
Yeah, it's a great neighborhood. But no, it's like for me in particular, I didn't really have like parents around. Like my dad kind of disappeared. Once my parents got divorced, and so he wasn't around for much of for me growing up, really. And then my mom, single mom, had to work all the time. And then she was also like trying to finish college. So like she just wasn't around, but we were also like teenage boys. So she knew that like we're gonna, we can take care of ourselves for the most part. And we were good kids. Me and my brother like didn't get into drugs or drinking. I didn't drink till I turned 21. And it's, mostly because of like I found church and the Christian band thing. And I mean, I was more, it wasn't so much that I was like dedicated to Jesus as dedicated to wanting to make my band succeed, so I was like focused.
I get it.
And so, but yeah, so like I didn't have a good example of what an adult was, and so I've just been like, my 20s, man, were lost. And that's how I end up in this at 28 and 29 in this book, man. My 20s were just fucking lost, running all over the country, like not knowing what I was doing.
Yeah, I think that is definitely very evident in the book. Is that I think that talking to you now, like you're coming to the end of your 20s and you're like, fuck, look at all of this. One of the other, there's a couple other things that came up that I really related to. One of them was you talk a little bit about when I don't want to give away too much about spoilers about the book, but it's basically about you kind of lock yourself in a hotel room for a weekend with a bunch of substances to try to get this book out of yourself, and all the shit you go through in those 3 days and the memories you have, and you go through your whole story and stuff. But one of the things that you kind of went over, and I think it's a common thread and feeling for creative people, is that if I get this thing done and other people see it, or the person I want to see it, or the people I want to see it actually see it, they'll think better of me. And so sometimes we create things as creators with that whole thing in mind of, I'm going to feel better about myself when I get this done, because it's going to be so great and everybody's going to like love it, and everybody's going to think, wow, what a great and together person this is, because they managed to accomplish this fantastic thing. And then I think a lot of times we set ourselves up for disappointment with that expectation.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the same thing as believing that, finding the right girl is going to give you that, or, that there's a level of a certain drug that's going to give you that. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because as you were saying all that, you made me realize that I still feel exactly the same way in that regard as I did with the book, because like I'm still like chasing down podcasts and, you know, looking for like different music publications and stuff that I could get this book to, or reaching out to friends in music and stuff, like trying to get the word. I'm still trying to get the word out for this book. And it has absolutely nothing to do with like making money off of it, because I don't make any money off of it. And I'll never profit from it, the amount of money that I've spent in like, you know, producing it and marketing it. But it's like, I still feel like I'm going to get some kind of validation if I just get it like in Rolling Stone, you know, like that's all I need.
Right.
If it'll just be in Rolling Stone. And so like, yeah, I don't know if that's true. I'm glad you said that, because maybe I'll like chill out now and I won't be like so stressed out about getting it to people. Cause yeah, it really like, that's the thing about, I think it's fair to say about creative people, is that there's no end, you know, we're never done.
There's no end. Never.
God, what do we do? What do we get ourselves into?
Yeah, it's never done, man. And it's like, one of the things that, you know, it's kind of come up in the show about my career is that at some point I cashed in on kind of just being a problem solver more than being like famous for being like one particular type of, like, I'm not trying to be like Warhol, you know, or do a thing that Basquiat or something like that. Like, I decided it was more in my wheelhouse to not worry about starving all the time, so I could do a bunch of different types of work and be a problem solver for a bunch of, I can do an album cover, I can do a t-shirt, I can do a painting, I can do, you know, I can do whatever it is I need to do on any given day to make money, to keep myself working. And so it's never done. And I put this stuff out into the world, and then I move on to the next thing. And 6 months, I forget about this thing that I did that was so important to get done and impress people with on a particular week. And then like a month later, I'm like, I only think about it because I see it in my when I'm looking at my Instagram or something. I'm like, oh, that shirt was pretty cool or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like these things go out into the world and they have a life of their own. And I am the forgotten piece of the entire puzzle.
Yeah, no, I think about that too. And you know, because I do a lot of client work also in the video world. And in that sense, yeah, it's easy to like toss that stuff out there. And I've had so many clients that I've cared more about the work than they did, and I do this great work for them, and then they don't market it at all. So it like, because they don't know any better, they think like, oh, well, that was a bad investment. And I tell them like from the beginning, I'm like, you're gonna think this is a bad investment if you don't know how to market it, and if you don't market it. And then they just don't. They just think people are going to organically go to a YouTube of a brand they've never heard of.
Dude, totally.
But so
totally.
Like, I have to like detach myself from that stuff, and I've gotten way better at it. But for something like this, like and it's still early, so of course I understand I'm not detached from it yet, but I don't know how I will be, and I struggle with that because I know that I won't, like I said earlier, I want to adapt it into a TV show, so I need to start writing those scripts. But I'm working on the audiobook now too, and I have a ton of other ideas in my head, but I don't know if I keep working on this, is it time for me to like let this go? I'm so lost in that world too, man.
Dude, I totally feel that, in particular with creating this show. And, you know, every single episode I have a guest on, and we have to bring each other something, right? Like they bring me what they do to help me create content, and I bring to them eyeballs and ears for whatever the thing it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I've been really lucky to be able to cash in on so many talented friends and contacts over the years. And one of the things that is hard for creatives, and I'm sure you can probably understand this, is it can be really hard to self-promote because you don't want the world to think that you think you're something special. And so I think sometimes my guests are like, they feel weird promoting their episode because they don't want people to think that they're cool or special. And so I struggle a little bit sometimes with getting people to promote their episodes.
No, see, well, you don't have to worry about that with me. I don't struggle about that with that at all. In fact, I say that in the book. You know, it's like it's like the writer's ego that kept me alive, because I think the world needs to hear what I have to say. You know, and the thing is, it's like I'm not such a narcissist that I think everything I have to say is valuable and people should want to hear every thought I have. But this book, this particular thing, I'm so proud of, and I by my standard, it's very good. So I want it to get out there, and like I said, like when I have these conversations, like I come to new understandings not only about the book but about mental health and about life and about being a creative, you know, working in creative fields. So like I get value from your podcasts and your other episodes, so I know how valuable this podcast is. But yeah, no, I mean, I definitely want people to think that this book is special and that I'm special in the connection to this book. So, but also because I need, like, you know, record labels to let me use music and major publishing companies to let me use music. So yeah, no, I'm promoting the hell out of this thing, and any sharing any podcasts or anything that I'm lucky enough to be on. So I definitely appreciate it, man.
Yeah, no, of course. One of the other things that I wasn't super aware of until I always send out this little questionnaire to every guest. Like, can you fill this out? It helps me get information about you and where we can go with the conversation. And one of the things I wasn't aware about with you was your Zero Platoon charity that you run. Please tell me and, you know, everybody out there what you have going on with Zero Platoon.
So Zero Platoon's a charity I started back in 2013. It's you know, just me really running it, and I started.
You're a veteran. Just to set it up, you yourself were a veteran.
Yeah, I got out of the Army in 2009, and that's when I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder when I was in the Army, and that's part of the reason I got out. And I was 20. Like, that's another thing similar to the book. Like, I was 25 when I joined, and so
wow.
I had, you know, a stronger head on my shoulders than 18-year-old kids who go in there, who've never made their own doctor's appointments, you know, who've always, you know, answered to a principal, a teacher, a parent, and didn't know how to really take care of themselves. And so even though I was still dealing with depression and anxiety, and I saw, you know, kids try to kill themselves, and while I was in there. And a big struggle for me, coming from already doing music journalism, playing in bands, going to shows all the time, I didn't have that same freedom that I used to have outside of the military to just go to a show whenever I wanted. Oh, my favorite band is playing 20 minutes, 30 minutes away. You know, I can go experience that community and that catharsis I get from being in a show, singing along, or being in a pit or whatever, you know? And so I didn't have that. And so when I got out of the Army, I wanted to come up with something where I could take it to people in the military. So I had the connections through publicists and stuff from my music journalism days. And so it started off as a YouTube channel, which it still is. So if you just go look for Zero Platoon on YouTube, it started off interviewing bands about how music has helped them deal with hard times, like whether or not they actually dealt with depression or mental health issues. You know, we would do acoustic videos. So like, can you play this song and tell me why you wrote that song? So hopefully people make the connection of like, okay, this guy was feeling down and he didn't kill himself. He wrote a song, you know?
Sure.
And so music has always been what got me through this stuff. And so I wanted to provide that to people who didn't have the freedom to go find it themselves. So it started as a YouTube channel. The goal was always to take bands out on tour to go play at military bases. which I have not yet gotten to do, but I did go out on a couple tours with some bands, and I got to take some guys to play at military hospitals that treated mental health issues. So, in fact, when I was in the Army, I spent 30 days in a facility that I like volunteered to go to because I knew I was drinking too much. I was already talking to a therapist in the military, and he asked me what we needed to do to make sure I wasn't going to kill myself. And I said, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to kill myself. And he said, well, that's not good enough. And I said, I just need to get out of this situation I was in. And they told me there was this 30-day facility I could go to. So I said, that's great. Let me do that. And so I went out on tour in 2015 with Dave Haas and Rocky Vodolato, who are kind of like Americana, like singer-songwriters, but Dave Haas was the singer for The Loved Ones, which is a punk band. And I took Rocky to play at to the exact military hospital that I spent 30 days in. And that felt really good to like be like 5 years later, 6 years later, and to be able to like deliver on what I was trying to do. So Zero Platoon still exists on YouTube right now. Eventually it'll get back to the tour game once everybody gets back to the tour game.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, like if you go to the YouTube, there's interviews and acoustic videos from Vinny from The Movie Life, Matt Pryor from the Get Up Kids, Brett Detter from the Juliana Theory.
Wow.
There's a lot of really cool people on
those
there.
Those are bands people know.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. And like I said, you know, I was able to like use my connections, and as those connections have grown over the years, I've been able to, you know, keep it going with some bigger bands.
You know, that is one of the things, and we talked a teeny bit about this before we actually started recording, is that, and I've talked about this with other guests before, is that when you are involved in any music scene, but in particular when you're involved in the punk rock music scene, or, you know, the metal or emo or any of those kind of underground scenes, the thing that you get out of it is you get this giant family, and everybody's about 1 degree of separation from each other, no matter what the scene is. And so you can find people very quickly who can help you help other people.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think society at large maybe looks at what we do, and they think, oh, you know, this is a bunch of fucking, you know, outsiders.
Yeah.
But it's really about, all of this stuff is really about taking responsibility for your world and your community, and helping that, and helping those people, and helping. And then as you get older, it grows. A lot of us that grows into what our life becomes. And I was saying, I had a guest on who put me in contact with Punk Rock Saves Lives. And, you know, this whole thing of like, who would have ever known that, you know, going to, you know, see Black Flag and, you know, Social Distortion shows in 1982 would end up, you know, with me having a radio show or a podcast where I could spread the message that would actually help people save lives. And it's the same thing with what we're doing here, is like, if anything we've talked about so far today, whether it's addiction, or whether it's suicidal ideation, or whether it's this mental health for people who are in the military, if it helps even one single person, then every minute that we've spent doing this, whether it's you doing it on your end or my doing it on my end, you know, like you can't possibly ask for anything more than that, you know?
Yeah. And I mean, I'll say 2 things. The second thing is just to like, so I don't know, I'll just say it. Like, it's so huge to me when people tell me that this book has made them feel less alone. In what they're struggling with, and like that's the most important thing to me with this. And then like a byproduct of that, kind of to also like throw off any like sense of me bullshitting here, is that like it's also been relieving for me, because I was scared to death to put this thing out. I was so scared of people finding out what happened in my head, or what was happening in my head. But those people telling me that they're not alone, or that they feel less alone, make me feel less alone, and make me feel like, man, like, I spent so much time worrying about what people would think about this, but who cares? Because even if those people exist, I still have this family of other people who care about me and who are dealing with similar things. So, like, who cares about those other people? There are plenty, if not more, people who relate to it and are there for you to talk about it because they need somebody, just like I need somebody. And so, when somebody thinks they're thanking me for writing this, like, I'm thanking them too for, like, still letting me know that I'm not alone myself. Because I still need that. Just because I wrote this book doesn't mean I'm all fixed. Like, I'll never be fixed.
Sure.
That doesn't go away. Yeah. So yeah, I need to hear that just as much as everyone else, man. So it's great to see that. It's so relieving to talk about it and to put it out there.
I can imagine because anybody who reads the book is going to have an immediate reaction to being able to put themselves in how you feel. It's very evident where you're at in your life and where you're at in your head. And I think that a lot of people will be able to associate with that. And then to hear you talking right now and know that in the end, because the book kind of leaves off a little bit before I kind of feel like we get any kind of resolution on where you were at. But hearing you talk now and knowing that you are doing better and that, kind of the closing on the book, we talk a little bit about how you have a wife now and that your life is kind of in a good place. Like, I felt better knowing that you were okay. And talking to you now, it's like, yes. All right.
Well, and that's also another reason I try to do these things too, is because, I mean, I won't spoil the ending, but one of the things my wife said about it when she saw it was that, like, she's read other books where, people talk about that bad part of their lives, but then, talk about how it got better or whatever. But the thing is that, like, mine didn't get better for years. And so, like, if I was dedicated to ending this book with a happy ending, it wouldn't have been finished for a very long time, Right. And I don't want to like mislead people to think that, like, it does get better right away, because I don't want anybody who's going through this stuff to be like, oh, well, yeah, he got better, like, the next day or, 2 months later.
Right.
I haven't gotten better, so my situation must be way worse, and that's
fair.
Like, my situation didn't get better for years, and that's why this book came out like 5 years after I wrote it, because I wasn't better for a very long time.
I think that explanation for the last couple chapters of the book is very fair, and I think it was a smart way for you to handle it, to, like, let people know, like, you know what, sometimes you go through shit and you got to keep going through it until you find the light. Yeah. And I'm glad you did find the light. It sounds like you're doing much better. And, because that's the thing about the book, is even though you were clearly struggling, it's also very clear that you're a good guy. You're a good guy.
Thanks, man.
And you have good intentions, and you actually, for some of your questionable moral moments, it was pretty clear that you're a good person, even when you weren't doing things that weren't necessarily good in the moment.
Yeah.
So, I think my battery's dying.
All right.
If that's a segue to the ending. So give the Zero Platoon. You have a Twitter for that?
Yeah, I mean, Zero Platoon's easy to find. It's just spell out zero, and you'll find it everywhere. It's Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. It's all The YouTube address is Zero Platoon Video, like youtube.com/Zero Platoon Video. But if you just search Zero Platoon on there, you'll find it.
Okay, cool. And then I will put all of your other social media, because we forgot to get it up front, in the comments below. If you want to shout it out right now, if we can get it in.
Yeah, it's just a burger
this
joint.
Shit goes dead.
BERGER. So a burger joint on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, and I'm always like making video content to go with the book. I've been interviewing like bands and people, you know, associated with it. So I'm going to be putting out a lot of video content with it pretty soon. The audiobook's going to drop pretty soon too. So yeah, follow on social and you'll see some cool things happening soon.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for coming and being on the show, Mike. It was really, really cool to read your book,
man.
And it was great to get to know you as a person, having read the book. I hope people read the book and watch this episode and get a sense of what a good guy you are. And I appreciate your time.